Yes,
Yes, sir. Namaste, Ichiti, Omada,
Ime Munjin.
Ime Shen.
Imei Kelly.
So here are the table of contents that we are going to break down in details later. So please look forward to our presentation on Plato.
And first, we will start off with the introduction to Plato's life. I'll start off with the information about Plato's background. Plato was a famous and influential ancient Greek philosopher, and he is the son of Aristotle and Person. Also, he was the student of Socrates. And all the information that we know about Socrates was recorded by Plato in the form of dialogues. Plato was famous for his dialogue, which showcased his metaphysical theory of forms, and his dialogue was separated into early, middle, and late dialogues. Besides that, his famous work is The Republic, which argues that the king should become philosopher or the society should be run by a philosopher, as they proposes a special level of knowledge which requires to rule the republic successfully. In metaphysics, Plato envisioned systematic, rational treatment of forms and their interrelations. He started with the most fundamental amongst them, which is the good or the one. Moreover, in ethic and moral philosophy, he also developed a view that a good life required not just a certain kind of knowledge, which Socrates has suggested, but also the habituations to healthy emotional responses. Therefore, the harmony between three parts of soul is important, which is reason, spirit, and appetite. Lastly, his work also contained discussion in aesthetic, political philosophy, theology, cosmology, epistemology, and the philosophy of language. Now I'll pass it to Kelly to talk about the influences of Plato.
Alright, now I'm going to talk about some other influences on Plato, which I will be dividing them into two parts, the events on the left side and people such as Pythagoras on the right side. Also, just to point out something, you can see the arrows. For the Peloponnesian War, it's pointed to Plato's eyes because it has changed his view on politics and democracy as a whole. And the trial of Socrates also changed his view on politics, but I put it at his heart because it was a heartbreaking occurrence. And lastly, the meetup with Pythagoras is at the head because Plato learned from Pythagoras and also gained ideas from his disciples. Next, the Peloponnesian War was a battle fought between the Greek city-states Athens and Sparta, but Athens won. During this time, Plato was in military service for 5 years, and he was also born during this period. With this, many books of Plato, such as the dialogues, are historically set during this time of the war. He talks about the good conduct of war and the practice of virtue, which is highly related to ethics. Now, as you can see from the picture, Socrates was on trial because people charged him for going against the Athenian gods and also corrupting the youths. And also people felt that Socrates was tried due to his open-mindedness. But Socrates, however, had no guilt and did not try to escape, and he drank the poison to pay homage to the truth. Plato had always wanted to pursue politics, but with this execution of Socrates, Plato didn't want to deal with politics anymore, and because democracy can eventually degenerate into tyranny. It's also interesting to note that Socrates died from democratic vote, which can mean that democracy killed him. Anyway, Plato wrote the apology as a defense and also a praise for Socrates' actions. After the execution, Plato went to travel and he went to places like Egypt and Sicily. So in Italy, he met Pythagoras and learned about his works. It is also because of Pythagoras that Plato valued maths, and Plato also said that maths are necessary truths. We can also see that in Plato's dialogues, there's Pythagorean teachings. Now I'll pass back the stage to Munjin.
Thank you, Kelly. So next up, I will be explaining about Plato's Academy, and it can also be called the Academy, and it is a institution that is established by Plato himself in Athens. It was named after academia, and no, it was not a name after a school or an institution. In fact, it was a public gymnasium and a place for religious activities. The academy grounds became a place for intellectual debates and conversations as Athens at the time experienced a shift in current in education, politics, and culture. During that time, sophists and philosophers from all over Athens came to the academy to experience the uh, cultural shift and the intellectual activities that has increased so much throughout the years. The philosophical concept that was taught in the academy revolves and resembles Plato's devotion to memory of Socrates, who seeks truth through inquiry rather than being okay with logical inconsistent beliefs. The academy was a place for intellectual discussions, arguments, and to think philosophically in order to seek the truth. In fact, Plato was said to be the first great thinker who established the subject of philosophy in schools of today. Even more so, Plato's academy is said to be influence of the institutional features of modern universities of today, except the fact that Plato did not charge any tuition fee to his students back when he was still around. Plato has so many intellectual followers that he had one who stood out of all. He is nicknamed as Plato's greatest pupil, and yes, he is Aristotle. Why did Plato like him the best? Aristotle is known for having discussions that challenges Plato's views. That's why he stood out. Here is a famous painting by Raphael of the Italian Renaissance, painted in the 1500s. Let's take a closer look. Let's divert our gaze to the middleman, which we know to be Plato on the left and Aristotle on the right. Both represent different schools of philosophy, the academy versus Lyceum. They seem to be having a deep discussion about something. If we take a closer look, Plato's finger is pointed upwards towards the sky, possibly indicating the theory of forms, which argues that the real world isn't exactly the physical one, but instead a spiritual realm of ideas filled with abstract concepts. In contrast, Aristotle's hand seemed to be gesturing something that is flat on the surface, which is said to believe that it is a visual representation of his belief in knowledge coming from experience, that is, empiricism, which theorizes that humans must have concrete evidence to support their ideas and very much grounded in the physical world.
Now we will be discussing about the major philosophical ideas of Plato. The first major philosophical ideas of Plato is the allegory of cave. Plato's allegory of cave is one of the famous works in the Republic, and it is found in the book 7 of the Republic. Plato's allegory of cave is a lengthy dialogue on the nature of justice. The main theme of allegory of cave is that human perceptions cannot derive true knowledge, and instead, the real knowledge can only come with philosophical reasoning. In his example, the prisoners have lived their entire life in the cave and only able to see shadows, but to them, those shadows are reality. Therefore, it presupposes that there are no distinctions between appearance and reality. In the story, there's a group of prisoners who chain up in the cave and they have been lived in the cave since birth. Behind them, there's a fire burning, and those who rule the cave will hold up different objects in front of the fire and cast the shadow on the wall so that they can see it. They also make sound for the prisoners to hear the different echo in the cave. They act as the puppet master to control the prisoners' perceptions. Over time, they could recognize the shadows and attach name to it, and even have competition with each other. They will guess what object is coming next and give each other honor and prizes. However, one day, one of the prisoners was released, and he looked around and confused by this. He looked around the cave and he saw the fire. This is the first time that he has ever perceived such a thing, and he also see the puppets next to the fire. He could recognize some of the puppets from the shadows that he had seen before, and he realized that the shadows must come from the puppets, and the puppets is the great reality. He immediately walked out of the cave, and the sun burned his eyes, and he felt discomfort. But gradually his eyes began to adjust, and he opened them up, and he see the world for the very first time. And he realized that the true reality is not just the shadow, and the shadow was just the image of the great reality. He remembered the other person who spent their whole life in the cave, and he pitied them because there is a great reality that is in which they preserve. He returned back to the cave and to lighten up his friend, but they do not know what he is talking about. He tried to explain that the real world to them, but they cannot begin to understand, because this is the only life that they know, and they cannot understand other things else. The other prisoner realized that there is a change in the free prisoner's eyes from being exposed to the sun. Because he cannot see anything, because of this, he struggled with seeing and guessing the shadows. They all laughed at him and think that leaving the cave is a waste of time, so no one would leave the cave. This is the end of the story, and I'll pass it to Kelly to talk about the theory of forms.
One of another famous works of Plato is the theory of forms, also known as the theory of ideas. So Plato claims that there are two realms, the physical realm and the spiritual realm. On the right side, we see the physical realm such as Earth. We can use our senses to perceive things, hence it's called the realm of appearances. And also a subjective realm because the realm is subjected to perceptions. However, according to Plato, this is not the real world but an image of the spiritual world or the shadow of the spiritual world. And this world is also imperfect and impermanent. On the left side, there's another realm, the spiritual realm, where the realm is objective, which means it's unbiased, neutral, where the forms exist and where the real things exist. So you would ask, what are forms? According to Plato, here are some characteristics of forms. Firstly, forms are universal, they are abstract and perfect, also known as the real things. Secondly, they are eternal, so they can't be changed or modified, and they are not causal. Thirdly, it is an objective knowledge, which is not influenced by personal opinions or perceptions, also known as objects of knowledge. Lastly, we can know these forms through reason, which is by using our minds. In order to access the spiritual realm, we must use rationality. As said from the previous slide, we can also access the realm through mind and reason. The interesting is, Plato said that we know about these forms even before we were born, hence having the innate knowledge of them. But you might think it's silly because it's not evoked. So Plato says we can use the Socratic method to obtain that knowledge, which is by asking and answering questions or through an argumentative dialogue. Now, a trick question. We have two dogs here, a Chihuahua and a German Shepherd. Which one is the dog? We would say both are dogs, but what will Plato say? According to the theory of forms, all these dogs are just the shadows or images of the real or ideal perfect dog in the spiritual realm. In the physical realm, it can take any forms and be perceived differently by different people through our senses. But ultimately, the idea or the form is only one in the realm of forms. This can even be applied to drawings. If we are drawing the same dog, for example, this Chihuahua, what we draw may not be the same numerically, But ultimately, there is a form of dog in the spiritual realm, which is the real dog. Okay, now I'll pass the stage to Munji.
Plato's tripartite soul theory. In the book The Republic, which is written in Socratic dialogues by Plato himself, revolves around the concept of political philosophy and overall talks about the ideal formation of a city. In his work, he drew forth the relations of human soul to the meaning of political structure. In Plato's explanation of what drives the human force, there are three parts to the human soul. Thus, it is called the Plato's tripartite soul theory. The three parts are logistikon, thymoids, epithematikon. In English, they simply meant rational, spirited, and appetite. So it goes like this. Plato explains and associates the human soul to a comprehensive theory of human psyche and an individual's designation within a wider society. The theory is based on the principle that the intimate psyche of the individual corresponds with the composition of the external society. The theory says that every individual's character is determined by a dominant part of their psyche or soul. For example, Plato defines a moral individual as one who has attained supreme control over the spirited and appetite because his rationality part of his soul is strong. This he applied to the three classes in the society, namely the ruling class, the military class, and commoners. The ruling class exhibits dominance towards rationality, the military class to spirited, and the commoners to appetite. In detail, a person with dominant rationality psyche are most likely to have deeper access to logical part of the soul and are most likely people who are more fit to run a government because they are more likely to be wise thinkers and they could differentiate well between fantasy and reality. For the spirited part of the soul being the most dominant part of the psyche, these are people who are more emotionally driven, passionate, and courageous. Plato believed that these people are the soldiers who fight with all their strength in wars with courage, pride, and honor. The appetite represents the commoners because these are the people who only desire simple day-to-day needs or wants such as food, money, and sex, rather than aiming for bigger goals such as the people who are rational.
We will now discuss about the branches of philosophy which connected to the major philosophical ideas. The first branches of philosophy is epistemology, which connected to Plato's allegory of cave. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, and it often asks questions like, what do we know? And are we really sure that we know something? In the cave, the prisoners have to use their senses to perceive the world around them, such as sight, touch, and hear. Even though they are chained up in the cave, but they can still feel the ground and the temperature around them. The darkness of the cave was ignorant in the physical forms, and this led the prisoners to believe that the shadows was real and the sound that they heard is made from the shadows. It also shows one of the problems with empiricism, which is nihilism, where they believe that the real world is what they see. Because when the three prisoners came back to the cave and told the other prisoners that the real world is not just the shadows, the others would not believe on him. Therefore, they only believe that what they see is what the real world is. It also shows that the prisoners have the knowledge of what the objects are from being able to name the shadows. This knowledge is a perception that is tied to the material world. And they can still recognize it because they already have the name attached to them. This also shows that the knowledge of the form is present in everyone from the start, and even it is in ignorance. And now I'll pass it to Kelly to talk about the metaphysics.
Thank you, Yifan. Now I'll be talking about metaphysics in the theory of forms. So in the theory of forms, it also contains epistemology and ethics, which I will not be touching them today. Metaphysics is the field of that focuses on the nature of reality, whether something is real or does it exist. And these questions are difficult or may not yet be answered by science due to the lacking findings and advances currently. Because it's hard to experiment these entities when we can't see or touch them, such as the existence of a spiritual world or the existence of angels. So with Plato's theories of forms, these arise some metaphysical questions like, does the spiritual world exist? Are the forms real? Are we real? Are we real if we are merely the shadows of the forms, according to Plato? Also, what bridges or connects the physical and spiritual world? Is it just a line or a portal or something beyond human thinking capabilities? Other than that, we should also note that metaphysics deals with questions on causality and freedom. With what Plato said about innate knowledge, this means that we may already exist before we were born, hence having a past life. If that's the case, are we still free and not determined by our past? So these are some metaphysical questions. And with Plato's forms, it sits quite perfectly with the notion of God. For instance, Plato's idea of the body and the soul is adopted by Christianity, although it's not explicit thought about the duality. And this Greek concept of having another realm of perfection that is higher than us, which is eternal and timeless, spaceless, the spaceless realm, was also the inspiration for the concept of heaven. With Plato's theory, he has set a new path for the worldview and has impacted us ever since. Now, Munjin will elaborate more on the branches related to the tripartite soul.
Plato's tripartite soul theory revolves around ethics and metaphysics in the main branches of philosophy. First of all, why ethics? This theory touches on the moral and political issues in hopes of cultivating the ideal civilization and to understand how the society works. Plato uses the types of soul to identify an individual's intentions. In this case, he matched the different social classes to each types of tripartite soul to justify each of their traits and goals in the social hierarchy. This falls in the ethical subjectivism category because the theory suggests that the ethical judgment depends solely on the individual. In this pluralistic society, people have so many subjective moral judgments that some might think that smoking is morally wrong and some might not have the same opinion about it. But in Plato's book, he explains that the tripartite that make up an individual soul that influence the mechanism of social hierarchy. In other words, rationality, spirit, and appetite forms a basis for the psyche of the soul, thus forming the drive of the human actions and their judgments. Second of all, why metaphysics? Plato believes that soul continues on even after death. He believes in life after death. According to Plato, The ultimate goal of the soul was to achieve eternity and perfect knowledge formed like the gods. Truth, justice, beauty, and rational knowledge. He believed in notion of reincarnation and that the soul perfected itself with every reincarnation. In the book, he also describes the structure of the tripartite soul. The soul is the charioteer, controlling two wings each, one white and one black. The main goal of the charioteer is to ascend to divine heights, but the black horse always poses trouble and the chariot keeps falling back to earth. In short, our rationality controls our appetite and the spirited part of the psyche.
Now it's time for the conclusion. Moving on, we will first explore the flaws of Plato's ideas. So his ideas are very idealistic and may be too abstract and vague. For example, we might get some idea on what the forms are about, but there's no definite answer to what it is. With that, many would compare Plato's work with Aristotle's work, where Aristotle would include more logic and declarative statements. Other than that, Kant also rejected Plato's idea and said that the forms are merely imaginations. Next, Plato's ideas such as the theory of forms may be one-sided because Plato is a dualist and his ideas may be based on dualism, where the mind and body are separate entities, which is also rejected by Aristotle. His works are also inconsistent and Plato takes a very long time to portray what he wants to say. He himself also can't prove the ideal forms. With Plato's notion of us living in a less real universe or realm, this may be difficult to comprehend for many of us, hence being abstract and not believed by many. So the first strand of Plato's idea is related to what he said according to knowledge, which are the three necessary and sufficient conditions, where we should be believed, the proposition, and the proposition must be true, and that it must be backed up with good reasons where we are justified in believing it. So with knowledge being justified, the claims made will be more reliable. Secondly, most of Plato's ideas are not dependent on the senses or our experiences, but rather more on rationalism. So this is because Plato deemed the senses as unreliable, and the senses may distort our views of reality and therefore can't show us the true form of reality. Last but not least, Plato's ideas are thought-provoking and hence encourages people and many other philosophers to question ideas rather than just accepting and believing the ideas on a surface level. With the abstract and mysteries in Plato's dialogues, it also acted as inspirations to many philosophers, artists, and even scientists. Now I'll pass the stage to Ishan.
Now I'll be talking about the importance of Plato's work on the study of philosophy. Firstly, Plato's given an insight into the philosophical teaching of Socrates. As we all know, Socrates did not record any of his lessons, and his idea was all recorded by Plato. Without Plato, we will not know any information about Socrates and his idea on the field of philosophy, such as dialectics. Secondly, Plato recognized that the need for humans to work together in a society for mutual benefit and profits. He believed that everyone has different skills and attributions, and those could be combined to meet the needs of the society. Therefore, he divided them into three main types. First, people who was driven to produce things, such as farmers. Secondly, people who act as guardians and were concerned with protections and the soul elements of the spirit, such as military leader. The last group is those who concerned with the reason elements of the spirit, such as ruler or scholar who are smart. The last group is the smallest group amongst all the three groups. Lastly, following on from the division of labor and the three main types of people in society, Plato was able to establish a political and economic model which worked for the benefit of all. In the society, people will work together for mutual gain, which would in turn lead to a prosperous and thriving political and economic structure. That's all from me, and I'll pass it to Runjin to talk about the impact of Plato on the field of philosophy.
Last but not least, I will be talking about Plato's impact to the field of philosophy. First of all, the Socratic method. As philosophy students, we are well versed in this particular method, as it is a method of philosophical questioning in hopes of finding the way to real wisdom. If it weren't for Plato and his dialogues, I'm afraid that the epistemology in philosophy that we learn today will not be as well established. Not to exaggerate, but will we even be bothered to learn about philosophy? That's because the Socratic method constantly challenges and pushes people to think hard and distinguish between justified belief and opinion. Quote unquote, the unexamined life is not worth living. This particular line is said by Socrates in Plato's dialogue. This is a statement that inspired many people to step out of their comfort zone and to yearn for knowledge in their lives. Next and last one, Plato's materialistic view on things was challenged by Aristotle. This is a good impact to the field of philosophy, because I think that as philosophers, we need to be open to accept different views in establishing philosophical arguments, and it opened doors to many different views and approaches to philosophical questions. Well, let me talk a little bit about Aristotle and his view. Even though he is Plato's pupil, he does not always agree to his teacher's views on some things. So, Aristotle said our path to knowledge comes through logical and methodical experiment and discovery of the world around us. As we can see, both philosophers have different views and approaches to philosophical questions. Take a look at this dialogue. Plato asks, "What's your dream?" Aristotle replies, "Wake up and smell the coffee." Well, that encourages the openness to accept different point of views in philosophical arguments because of this contrast, contributing to expansion of uses of philosophy in our daily lives.
Success Aristotle!
Meow, meow, meow.